we're going to create a template from an existing machine for future deployment of VMs. One reason we do that is in case we have a corrupted VM that has a K1 or K2 card that is already enabled on it. We can always recreate a new VM quickly from an existing template. So what I like to do, I found for me that if the K1 or K2 card PCI pass-through is enabled, I've had more trouble trying to configure the VM from the template with that card that's already enabled. So what I normally like to do is remove the PCI pass-through, and you can either do it through the vSphere client by selecting, depending on what hardware type you have. If you can do it through the vSphere client, you would just right-click, go to Edit Settings, and then remove that PCI pass-through. Since I have a different, or I have the hardware version 10, I'm going to do it through the web interface. So here I'm on the web interface. I'm going to go ahead and remove that PCI device, which is the K1 card that was mapped to this particular VM. Go ahead and say OK to that. I'm going to go back over to my vSphere client view and go ahead and create that template of that particular VM. So I'm going to right-click that VM, the Win7 VM, to create a template, and I'll go to Template. I'm going to say Clone to Template. I don't want to convert that existing VM to a template, but I'm going to clone to template. Go ahead and do that. I'm going to give that template a name, and we're just going to call that Temp2. Select my data center. Next, select my host. I only have one, but if I had more than one, I could select a different one, but I'm going to go ahead and select my one host. I'm going to leave the disk format the same as the source. But if I had multiple data stores, I could put that template on a different data store than what it currently is on. Just note how much space you have when you're saving a template. I only have one. I have plenty of space, and we'll leave it there and say Next. And I'll go ahead, look at my summary. Everything looks good. Say Finished. So give that a few moments. It'll then create, it looks like it's creating an actual VM, that icon, but it will change. It's going to change to this particular Temp2. If you recall, that's what I named it. We'll change the icon to look like a couple of pieces of paper, a template icon. Now that the template is completed, you'll see that under the view that we were under, Host and Clusters, that Temp2 is no longer here. And now that it's created, it actually is the template, so you won't see it under Host and Clusters. You'll see it under VMs and Templates. So if you go to Home, Inventory, VMs, and Templates, you should see it. Yeah, right here you should see it, and now the icon has changed. If you recall, it now is a template icon, which is like the double pieces of paper there. We're going to go ahead and create a new VM from this template, but before I do, I just want to mention a couple of things. If we were replacing, like if we had created a template and then somewhere down the line we had a VM that became corrupted, and we wanted to go ahead and replace that VM or get rid of the VM and then create a new one with the same name, we want to make sure that we remove the old VM. And how you do that is you would highlight it, right click it, and say delete from disk. If you say remove from inventory, it would remove it from inventory, but it would still be a valid VM, you just wouldn't see it under this data center, but it would remain, all the VMDK files would remain under that under its storage. So we want to delete it from disk if we were going to do that, if we were going to name it the same thing to avoid any confusion. But for this demo purpose, I'm going to just name the new VM something different. So we're going to go ahead and select that template. I'll right click, go to, right click, go to Deploy Virtual Machine from this template. I'll go ahead and give the new VM a name, and I'm just going to call the new VM Demo 2. I'll select my data center and say next. I'll select my host and say next. I'm going to leave the same virtual disk format. Again, you can change it if you want to either thick provision, lazy zeroed, eager zeroed, or go to thin provisioned. Again, I only have one data store. If you had multiple data stores, you could change it. I'm going to leave it as it is. Say next. I'm going to go ahead and check the customize using the customization wizard and say next. We're going to go ahead and give it the owner's name and organization. I'm going to use the virtual machine name for the NetBIOS name, this radio button. I'm going to go ahead and select that. You could type it in if you want, or a different name if you select. But I like to use the virtual machine name, so I'm going to go ahead and select that radio button. Say next. This is Windows 7, so I'm going to uncheck this server license information. You can enter in the key information later. You can activate that if you like. Next to that, go ahead and give it the password. And say next. Time zone. Next. I'm not going to run any first time scripts, so we're going to say next. And I'm going to use custom settings here at this one, because what we want to do is we want to set the NIC or the network properties to use, by default it uses DHCP. We want to make sure that it uses a static IP. So I'm going to go ahead and select that drop down. For the network properties, use the following IP settings, so I'll go ahead and put that information in. Just give me one moment. And go ahead and say OK to that. Next, I'm going to leave it in a work group. You can join the domain. I like to go ahead and leave it in the work group, log in for the first time, and then join the domain. It just, just to make sure that I don't have any issues with username and password. I've found that I've had issues in the past, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it in the work group for now, and I'll join the domain later after I launch this VM. Go ahead and say next. By default, this box is checked, and we want to leave that. Generate new security ID. We want to go ahead and create a new SID since we took this from an existing VM, and we'll say next. I'm going to save this customization for later if we ever decide to use it again, so I'll just name it Dell Temp 3 because I think I have a couple others with the same name. So we'll go ahead and say finish to this. Finish again. We'll look over our summary. Everything looks good, so I'm going to go ahead and say finish. And we'll let it do its thing. As you can see, it's creating the new VM called Demo 2. It'll take just a few moments. I'll pause this video and start the VM once it finishes. Okay, now that the VM is completed, the creation of the new VM from the template, we're going to go ahead and start it up and make sure everything is good. A couple things to note is that the VM may need to reboot a couple of times for its final configurations. We'll go ahead and find that out. Let's turn this one on. Okay, now that the VM is finished and we just started it, it may require a reboot for some final configurations. We'll give it just a couple of moments here at this screen to see if it requires a reboot. Once it's finished with the final reboot, we'll go ahead, log in, make sure everything looks good, and then we'll join the domain. If you recall, we just kept it in a work group on this particular VM. And once that is done, then we'll go ahead and add the PCI pass-through, the K1 card. If you recall, previously with the template, when we created that template, we removed the PCI pass-through. So as soon as this is done with its configurations, we'll go ahead and add that capability. As you can see, it's going through its reboot action right now. It may be a couple times prior to the completion. So again, we'll give it a couple minutes. I'll pause this video and pick back up once I see the final reboot. So this VM has restarted for the last time and the setup is continuing. So it'll be just a few moments. It did say setting up for the first time. So I was able to successfully log into the VM and add it to the domain. Now I'm going to go ahead and shut this VM down so we can add the PCI pass-through to this VM. And as you know, it has to be, to add the K1 or K2 cards, we need to have this VM turned off. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and pause and we'll pick back up as soon as the VM is shut down. Okay, the Demo 2 VM is now shut down. We're going to add the PCI pass-through or the K1 card. Because I'm at this VMX 10 version, the hardware version is 10 on mine, I'm unable to do the edit function through the vSphere client. It requires me to go through the web interface. As you can see, I get this error message. If you're running a lower hardware version than 9, you'll be able to do it through the vSphere client. So I'm going to go over to the web interface. I already have that up. We're going to edit settings. And this is very similar when doing it through the vSphere client. Once that comes up, we'll go ahead and add that PCI pass-through. Takes just a moment. Okay. We're going to add, we'll select, go ahead and add a PCI device. Say add. Should come up with the K1 card. As you can see, I have 2 of them installed, so I can pick either 8, 9, 46, or 47 since no other VMs are currently using any of them. None of them are mapped. Actually, the VM that I have, the Win 7 demo VM, had 8 mapped to it, so I'm going to leave 8 alone and I'm going to select 9 and say OK to that. And once that task is complete, which it is, we'll go ahead and turn that VM on, which I'm doing through the web interface, but we can also now, actually I could go back, if you were using a lower version, hardware version, and I believe you are, if you're using a VMX 8, you'd be able to do it through the client here. I can turn that VM on through here. I just couldn't edit the property. There's some functions I can't do when I'm at a higher hardware version through the vSphere client. Okay, so that VM is now turned on. Now that we have the PCI pass-through or the K1 card enabled on that, we can no longer launch the console from the vSphere client or even the web interface. You'd have to go through VMware View. So now we're going to have to go into VMware View and add that VM, that desktop, to VMware View. So I'm going to pause this video, we'll go over to that, and then add it to VMware View. Okay, I'm at my View server. I'm going to launch the admin console, the View administrator console, so we can add that desktop. So we'll go ahead and launch that, log in. And we'll add it to the existing pool. So we'll select this pool. Go to inventory. Add. You can see we already have Win 7 there, but we'll look for, we should now see Demo 2. As you can see, here's Demo 2. So I'm going to select that at the Add Desktops, highlight it, go to the Add button. It'll go ahead and add it to the bottom pane of the window here. Say OK to that. And there it is. I had to do a refresh. If you saw me hit this refresh button, it may eventually have refreshed on its own, but to speed it up, I went ahead and hit the refresh button. It's going to take a couple of moments here. It needs to talk to the agent. The agent is already installed because we took it from an existing VM that had the agent there. So we'll give it a few minutes. I'm going to pause this video, come back. Once I see that this agent has shows a provision status, then we'll go ahead and complete the configuration of this particular VM and then launch VMware View. Okay, you can now see the agent is now available. So we're going to go ahead and add a user to this particular VM. So we'll right click that VM, Demo2, and say Assign User. I'll just look for a user here. I'm going to go ahead and assign it to this View user. Okay. And now that it has an assigned user, I can log in to this particular VM through the VMware View client. So I'm going to pause this. We'll go to that screen and we'll see if we can log in. Okay, I'm going to launch my VMware View client. We'll go ahead and log into that View server. I'm going to log in as the View user that is now assigned to that Demo2. And let's see if we have our desktop. We'll give it a moment here. Looks like we're logging in. It's the first time, so it's going to take a moment. I'm going to say restart now because it's probably added that video card. So we're going to go ahead and restart. And we'll come back to this VM in just one moment. Okay, now that the VM has rebooted, we'll go ahead and log in again. We'll check all our settings, make sure that the K1 card is in fact enabled on this particular VM. A couple ways we can check it is, one, if you just right click on the screen, you'll see this NVIDIA control panel. That wouldn't be there if the K1 or K2 card was not enabled on that particular VM. We can also see in using Device Manager that the K1 card in my VM is installed. Again, under Device Manager, you should see your K1 or K2 card under your display adapters. This VM is now ready to be used in a VMware View environment.